Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is sounding the alarm, and the world needs to listen. While Donald Trump prepares for his historic meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska this Friday, Zelenskyy says Russia isn't preparing for peace at all. Instead, Putin is readying his forces for new offensive operations, even as he sits down for what could be the most important diplomatic talks of this war.
It's the worst thing that's happened, by far the worst that's happened since World War II. So I'm going in to speak to Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to be telling him, you got to end this war, you got to end it. We're going to have a meeting with Vladimir Putin.
This isn't just another political warning. This is intelligence from the front lines, and it reveals something terrifying about Putin's true intentions. Zelenskyy delivered his stark warning in a video message posted Monday night, citing reports from Ukrainian intelligence and military commanders. His message was crystal clear: Putin is definitely not preparing for a ceasefire or an end to the war. Instead, the Russian leader intends to present his meeting with Trump as a personal victory, and then continue acting exactly as before in the war on Ukraine. Think about that for a moment. Putin might be using peace talks as a propaganda tool while secretly preparing for escalation. The evidence backing Zelenskyy's claims is mounting. Ukraine's military spokesperson for the southern frontline sector, Vladislav Voloshin, told Reuters that Russia was moving military units in the Zaporizhia region for further assaults. These aren't the movements of an army preparing to stand down. These are the tactical repositions of forces getting ready to strike. Zelenskyy pointed out that there's no indication whatsoever that the Russians have received signals to prepare for a post-war situation. On the contrary, they're redeploying their troops and forces in ways that suggest preparations for new offensive operations. This revelation comes at a crucial moment. Trump announced Friday that he'll meet with Putin in Alaska on August 15th, describing it as a feel-out meeting to better understand Russia's demands for ending the war. The president has been increasingly frustrated with Putin, setting multiple deadlines for a ceasefire that have come and gone. Trump initially gave Putin 50 days to agree to peace or face severe sanctions, then shortened it to 10 days, and finally set Friday as the ultimate deadline. That deadline has now passed, and instead of sanctions, we're getting a summit. But here's where things get complicated and potentially dangerous. The Trump-Putin meeting is happening without Zelenskyy at the table. Ukrainian officials and European allies are deeply concerned that Trump might agree to far-reaching concessions behind Ukraine's back. The White House initially made a Putin meeting with Zelenskyy a condition for the Alaska summit, but Trump later said that wasn't a precondition. When asked about Ukrainian participation, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said the president is agreeing to this meeting at Putin's request, and the goal is to walk away with a better understanding of how to end the war. 26 European heads of state and government issued a statement Tuesday stressing Ukraine's inherent right to choose its own destiny. A just and lasting peace that brings stability and security must respect international law, they declared, including the principles of independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and that international borders must not be changed by force. The statement, endorsed by leaders of all EU member countries except Hungary, sends a clear message. Europe won't accept a deal imposed on Ukraine without Ukrainian consent.
President Trump announces that he is preparing to meet with Putin in Alaska, very far away from this war that is going on in our land, against our people, which still cannot be ended without us, without Ukraine. The relevant Ukrainian territorial issue is already in the constitution of Ukraine. No one will and cannot retreat from this. Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. Ukraine is ready for real solutions that can bring peace. Any decisions that are against us, any decisions that are without Ukraine, they're also decisions against peace. They will not work. These are dead solutions. They will never work.
Trump's approach to these negotiations has been revealing. He told reporters he expects to know probably in the first 2 minutes whether progress is possible with Putin. When asked how he would know, Trump responded with characteristic confidence. Because that's what I do, I make deals. He stated that if he sees an opening with Putin, he'll immediately call European leaders and Zelenskyy to discuss potential terms. Trump has suggested there might be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both countries and that Zelenskyy might need to prepare to sign something. He's even indicated he might tell Zelenskyy either lots of luck, keep fighting, or we can make a deal.
And if it's a fair deal, I'll reveal it to the European Union leaders and to the NATO leaders and also to President Zelenskyy. I think out of respect, I'll call him first, and then I'll call them after. And I may say, lots of luck, keep fighting, or I may say we can make a deal.
Well, the decision to even invite Putin is controversial, and so is the location, Alaska, a former Russian territory. The setting being celebrated by Russian nationalists who have long believed it was a mistake for Moscow to have given up Alaska, much like how Putin rues the loss of Ukraine.
But Zelenskyy's warning suggests Putin might already be playing a different game entirely. The Ukrainian president warned earlier Monday that any concessions to Russia would not persuade it to stop fighting. Russia refuses to stop the killings, he wrote on social media, and therefore must not receive any rewards or benefits. Concessions do not persuade a killer. The stakes of this Alaska meeting extend far beyond Ukraine's borders. Putin's proposal, presented to Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff during a meeting in Moscow, would require Ukraine to cede the eastern Donbas region and Crimea, territories that Russia has occupied through illegal military action. The plan would essentially freeze current battle lines, allowing Russia to keep the land it has conquered by force. There's another troubling dimension to Putin's approach. He refuses to recognize Ukraine as a sovereign nation or Zelenskyy as a legitimate president, claiming Zelenskyy has remained in power past his term despite martial law preventing elections. Putin wants to keep Zelenskyy hanging as a rogue figure to eventually replace him with a Russia-friendly leader. This reveals Putin's long-term strategy for Ukraine.
So these are the really complex and very important sticking points that could emerge and that are emerging.
Well, let me ask about the elephant in the room, or rather what's missing, and that's Ukraine. Trump has said he eventually wants a trilateral meeting that involves the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And we know that this idea was floated by Steve Witkoff, Trump's White House envoy, during his August 6th meeting with Putin. And he's been there 5 times already this year. But the Russians have so far shrugged off that idea. Why would Putin be so reluctant to meet Zelenskyy directly?
Oh, there are a number of reasons, but I think that, a couple major ones. If Putin sits down with Zelenskyy, it is recognizing him as the leader of another country. And Putin, number one, doesn't consider Ukraine an independent sovereign nation. And he certainly doesn't consider Zelenskyy a legal president.
For Ukraine, this represents nothing less than rewarding aggression and encouraging future attacks. The timing of Zelenskyy's warning is particularly significant. As Trump prepares for his Alaska meeting, Russian forces have scored significant battlefield successes in eastern Ukraine. Russian troops recently broke through Ukrainian defenses north of the important city of Pokrovsk, advancing at least 6 miles toward the town of Dobropilya. This breakthrough could allow Russian forces to drive a wedge between 2 of Ukraine's key eastern defensive hubs, potentially imperiling other cities in the region. These aren't the actions of a military preparing for peace talks. They're the moves of an army pressing its advantage. Zelenskyy's intelligence assessment reveals a pattern that should concern anyone hoping for genuine peace. Putin appears to be using the prospect of negotiations as cover for military preparations. While the world focuses on diplomatic possibilities, Russia continues repositioning forces and planning offensive operations. This dual-track approach, talking peace while preparing for war, has been Putin's playbook throughout this conflict. He used similar tactics before the 2022 invasion, engaging in diplomatic discussions while massing troops on Ukraine's borders. History shows Trump has been manipulated by Putin in the past.
Amy, Walter, nice to see you all. Good morning. I mean, this has to be, you can feel free to disagree, but the biggest meeting, the most important meeting of Trump's second term right now, maybe even arguably the first term too. You look back at it, the future of Europe is at stake here. The future of this deadly conflict, the world order, Russia's power in the world. You reported overnight that there's some discussion perhaps that Volodymyr Zelenskyy could be part of this meeting. That seems probably less likely, it seems, reading through this. But you cover the White House, Kristen. What is the expectation going in? And is there any belief that Trump may accept what Putin is suggesting here, which is a ceasefire in exchange for occupying significant portions of Ukraine?
Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, when he was asked about it last week, he basically said, well, some territories might have to be swapped and some might be given back to Ukraine. He wouldn't say no in terms of making a deal that would cede some of Ukraine's territory.
The broader implications of this moment extend well beyond the immediate conflict. If Putin successfully uses peace talks to buy time for military preparations while extracting territorial concessions, it would set a dangerous precedent for international relations. Other authoritarian leaders would learn that aggression pays, especially if you're willing to engage in performative diplomacy while continuing military operations. The international system based on rules and borders would suffer a potentially fatal blow. Ukraine finds itself in an impossible position. Zelenskyy cannot appear to be torpedoing what is essentially a Trump initiative, especially after working to repair his relationship with the American president over recent months. But he also cannot remain silent while his country's future is potentially being decided without Ukrainian input. His warnings about Putin's true intentions represent a desperate attempt to ensure that any negotiations are based on reality rather than wishful thinking. The Alaska summit represents a critical test for Trump's deal-making abilities, but it's also a test of American credibility and the international order. Putin is betting that he can use negotiations to achieve through diplomacy what he hasn't been able to accomplish through military force alone: international recognition of his territorial conquests and a free hand to continue pressuring Ukraine. The question is whether Trump will recognize this manipulation or fall for what Ukrainian officials are calling a trap. As Friday's meeting approaches, Zelenskyy's warnings echo with particular urgency. The Ukrainian president has seen Putin's tactics up close for years, and his intelligence services have tracked Russian military movements throughout this conflict. When he says Putin is preparing for new offensive operations rather than peace, it's not political posturing. It's an assessment based on hard evidence from the battlefield. The world will be watching Alaska closely, but perhaps more importantly, it should be watching what happens on the ground in Ukraine in the days and weeks following the summit. If Zelenskyy is right, Putin will emerge from his meeting with Trump, claiming victory, while Russian forces launch new attacks on Ukrainian positions. That would reveal the Alaska summit not as a breakthrough for peace, but as diplomatic cover for escalated aggression. The tragedy is that genuine peace remains possible, but only if it's based on strength rather than appeasement, and only if Ukraine is included as a full partner in any negotiations. Zelenskyy has repeatedly said Ukraine wants this war to end. It was not Ukraine that started this conflict, and Russia remains the only reason for its prolongation and the absence of peace. But peace cannot come at the cost of rewarding aggression or abandoning the principles that have maintained international stability for decades. As Trump prepares to sit across from Putin in Alaska, he would do well to remember Zelenskyy's warning. Concessions do not persuade a killer. The question now is whether American diplomacy will be guided by this hard-earned wisdom or by the false promise that Putin can be trusted to honor any agreement he signs. The answer may determine not just Ukraine's future, but the future of the international order itself.